It is my honor to introduce Adrienne Wiebe. Adrienne graduated from MBBC in 1979, having been there 3 years. Since then, for over 30 years, she's been involved in international development and that kind of work in a variety of places. Much of it has been in Latin America, Mexico, Guatemala, Ecuador are places that she came quickly to love, and her expertise and heart for Latin America has shaped a fair bit of her career. Her work with MCC has been as policy analyst, educator for Latin America, range of other activities. She has also worked with the Mennonite Center for Newcomers with Central American refugees. She's also done work in research and program development with Aboriginal communities for Alberta Health Services. Now she is working with Oxfam and is commuting to Ottawa so that she can work with global programs on ending violence against women and girls around the world. Along the way of this work, Adrienne completed a PhD in Anthropology from the University of Alberta. And she is a member of the Lendrum Mennonite Church. She and her husband, Arturo Avila, have two children, Rocio, 2 adult children, Rocio and Camilo. Now, I've only gotten to know Adrienne really quite recently. Met her at a few events, but she's one of those people that you meet over coffee and you go, I'd really like to meet you again. I'd like to have a whole lunch conversation with you. And she's just got this warmth of a smile, a warmth of thoughtfulness that engages and that is so much part of the intelligence of heart and of mind that she has brought to her work. She credits MBBC as a place where God's desire for shalom for the world caught hold of her mind and heart as Christian people participate in building that shalom. Adrienne, please.
Hello, thank you. I'm deeply honored by this distinction, especially coming from the college that set me on my path for my life. I'd like to share a few thoughts with you about college and life paths, an assortment of reflections that may resonate or contrast with some of your own experience, and maybe we'll start a conversation. Maybe one we'll have over coffee. Opening a door. It's probably a very cliche image for going to college, but it really seems to fit so well. It really was like opening a door to this wide open new place for exploration. Not that my growing up years were stifling or unstimulating. I had a wonderful, loving, and very stimulating family. But moving from the narrow confines of high school into the possibilities of learning whatever you wanted to learn, moving from living at home to living on your own for the first time, and knowing that this was the beginning of finding your way in life as an adult, this was all very exciting and a little bit scary. And it started off with going to college in Winnipeg. The classes I took and the profs that I interacted with really did open new doors for me. I think this is kind of a theme in the conversations today, in the sharing today. 2 classes still stand out for me that I'll tell you about. One of them was Eighth and Faith with Vern Ratzlaff. Maybe some of you remember that. Eighth and Faith. I can't remember the entire course title, but Eighth and Faith stands for Atheism and Faith, and then something else, I can't remember. I think it was a required first-year course. At the front of the class, Vern, a very unique character, for those of you who know him, you will probably agree with me, slightly rumpled with a long beard, classic image of a 1970s university prof, I suppose, worked us through all kinds of philosophical thinkers, from the Greeks to humanists to existential writers like Camus and Sartre and Nietzsche, to theological thinkers like Kierkegaard and Bonhoeffer. Probably a little heavy for first-year students, but we found it completely new and fascinating. And I think the takeaway for me from that class was, don't be afraid to look or to interrogate other ways of thinking or seeing the world. This doesn't necessarily mean you lose your own faith or convictions. Rather, it offers you the opportunity to critically consider other perspectives and to examine and to become clearer in your own thinking. Another seemingly common thread in the conversations today. Another highlight for me was Alan Gunther's Ancient Israel. Here was this cheerful, unassuming man, many of you know him, who quietly shook up all my assumptions about the Bible. This was the first time I heard about the Old Testament within the historical and material context of the Middle East, an examination of how the Bible became what it was, a fearless questioning and scholarly examination of the text. What? There were other ancient texts written at the same time by neighboring peoples? What? These events fit into a larger historical narrative in the Middle East? It went on. And after a mind-blowing class, Alan would wrap up the class by quoting a beautiful poetic text from Isaiah. Again, another door opened for me. I was taking a BA at the U of W at the same time. More learning came from those classes, like finding out that the study of literature wasn't for me, despite the assumptions that having an English professor for a father meant I would be able to do English papers naturally. What? I'm supposed to write about the symbolism of the landscape in this Steinbeck novel? But there was also positive learning, like studying Russian history by reading 10 Russian novels, and like taking an African history course and realizing, actually, Africa had a history before the Europeans arrived, something that I hadn't seemed to figure out in high school. College was also about being away from home for the first time and starting to be independent. I was 17 when I started college. My parents, who are here and who also both went to college and even met at college, as Canadian Mennonites are apt to do, were happy to send me off because they knew that the college was a safe and good place to learn and explore. So a little story, I don't know why this one came to me to share with you, but about contained rebellion. You may remember, or may not, you may not remember, that on September 9th in 1976, the same week that I started college, Chairman Mao Zedong died. I remember this because one of the first and probably the most rebellious things I did at college was to go with a couple other students from MBBC to a memorial for Chairman Mao that was being held by some fringe student group at the University of Winnipeg. I had no clue about Mao or China, but I thought it sounded like something very cool that a progressive college student would do. So I went. I don't remember much about it except a handful of students in a rather barren classroom. Very naive when I think about it now. The point is, college was a place to start exploring within a relatively safe environment. And just so you don't stay with the image of me at a Mao memorial at college, I'll tell you about something else rebellious that I did. One of those things was staying up all night with 5 other students. I'm not sure why we thought this was a good idea. We were in the White House. Some of you may remember the old wooden house behind Riverton Hall that belonged to MBBC. Keep in mind, we were students at a Mennonite church college, so being rebellious involved, and staying up all night, involved playing cards, drinking pop, and listening to Bread. For those of you who don't know, Bread is like the soft rock band of the 70s. Think, Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Waters kind of stuff, which according to one of the fellows who stayed up all night, was the music you needed to play if you wanted to get a Mennonite girl. Here's a tip for you. So college started to open my world, but I was still relatively unaware of what was going on in the world. In 1976, the year I started college, the man who later became my husband, Arturo, was released from 2 years in jail where he'd been held by the military dictatorship after the coup in Chile in 1973, and he came to Canada as a political refugee. The armed conflict in Guatemala was heating up to the near genocide of the Indigenous Mayan communities that I would later fall in love with. And the Indigenous residential schools in Canada continued to operate. Some of the people I would later work with in Aboriginal health were residents in those schools in the 1970s, separated from their parents, harshly disciplined, and alienated from their cultural communities. I wasn't aware of any of that yet, but college was a great start to learning about how to walk into the wider world. So you kind of know about my educational and vocational history. I won't go into that, but it just was a combination of my love for getting to know new places and new people with a passion for social justice, including the life-changing experience of living and working in Guatemala for 5 years in the early 90s that set me on my path to my PhD and the ongoing work that I like to call participatory applied research, or alternatively, community-based reflective practice. I can blame my parents for my love of traveling and experiencing different places. In addition to the kind of regular 70s and 60s camping trips you do with a tent trailer, in 1966, my family did a trip to South America when I was 7 and my brother Michael was 5. This is when North Americans didn't travel internationally much, and if they did, it was to Europe, not to South America. But this trip had a lasting impact on me. I still have clear images in my mind of the cardboard houses in shanty towns by the pounding Pacific coast around Lima, the bright, clear mountain air in Quito, Ecuador, and the dusty roads of the Mennonite colonies in the Chaco, where my dad was doing research for a book. I think this was the seed of my enduring fascination with Latin America. After college, Leanne Penner, who's here today with me, and I decided we needed to travel. Leanne and I became lifelong friends after we met at college. We probably bonded over trying to unthaw the frozen radiators in Ebenezer Hall with hair dryers. I am not kidding. There are pictures to prove this. The radiators in rickety old Ebenezer Hall, which was the girls' dorm, would freeze in winter, and we had to heat them up to get them working again. It was probably a serious safety hazard. Anyway, Leanne and I wanted to travel and sort of mulled around the idea of maybe the Middle East, maybe Latin America. I wonder what would have happened if we'd gone to the Middle East. Who knows what we'd be doing now? We decided on Latin America, thinking it was probably more woman-friendly than the Middle East. We had a great plan. 6 weeks covering 8 countries. Unfortunately, after 6 weeks, we had not even left Peru yet. We had met dozens of other backpackers traveling long-term in South America, and we decided to stay. In the end, we traveled almost a year, including Christmas way down in the tip of Tierra del Fuego in the south and all the way back up to the Carnival in Brazil. We were still a little oblivious of what was going on in the world. A labor strike would happen, and it would only be a problem because the trains weren't running. We weren't really interested in why there was a labor strike going on. I can't believe that we traveled through Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay at the height of the military dictatorships and really had no clue. But I remember moments of insight, like one day on a bus bumping through the stark highland landscape of Bolivia, I saw a woman in traditional Aymara clothing, working in her yard, sorting potatoes. And I began thinking, this woman is a woman just like me, but I had no idea what she thought, what her life was like, what her hopes were. And I started to become curious to connect and learn more. Fortunately, through the study and work that I've been privileged to be able to do over the years, the curiosity has moved from being a fascination with the unknown other into the joy of being able to call many women and men from diverse places my friends and colleagues. I think, so here's a little bit of a reflection about international work and a little bit of some thoughts for CMU. I think a similar shift to the one that I personally went through is happening in international development, a positive shift that will hopefully redress some of the power imbalances in this arena and enable truly collaborative social change. As mentioned in the notes, I'm currently working for Oxfam in monitoring, evaluation, and learning for programs around the world that work with ending violence against women and girls. I love this work because monitoring, evaluation, and lingo, MEL, in the lingo of the development field, largely has to do with looking at how projects are doing, what's working, what's not, and what can we learn from this so that the next time we can integrate that learning into the next phase. It's really the intersection of research and practice, and it's what I love to do. Actually, what I really love to do is sit around on hillsides and talk to women or with villagers or community leaders and reflect with them about their experiences and figure out with them what it means and what we can learn from that experience. But globalization and education, with globalization and education, more and more people are highly educated and experienced and better at doing the work in their own countries than any foreigner could ever be. I recently listened to a talk by a South Sudanese woman who is a lawyer actively working to increase the age of legal marriage in South Sudan from 12 years old, which it is right now, to 18. The picture we have of South Sudanese women is usually from refugee camps. We see them as victims that need our help. Many are victims, and many do need our help, but there are also lots of very knowledgeable and experienced women and men in these countries doing amazing things. So given globalization, the internet, the growing middle class, growing inequality in the world, and more vocal civil society movements in the South, in the global South, is there still a role for international NGOs? I can think of kind of three roles that international NGOs still have. One is working to improve global governance and the use of the common goods of this world, like working to change the international policies on things like climate change, migration, international trade, tax havens. Two, tackling harmful practices in the global north, such as the arms trade, unsustainable economic activity that produces incredible profits at the cost of the earth and local communities. And three, supporting Southern agents for change. We can place ourselves at the service of social movements and other expressions of Indigenous society in the South. Much of MCC's work is done this way. When I worked as policy analyst and advocacy coordinator for Latin America, we worked on issues identified by the partner organizations and churches that were linked with our North American constituency, like Central American immigration to the US, Canadian mining in Latin America, and peace building in the context of criminal violence in cities. Similarly, in Oxfam now, I just came back on Wednesday from 10 days in Cuba. I wasn't at the beach. Well, actually, I was one day on the beach. But rather in a workshop with women and men who are leading civil society organizations in Cuba around work around gender justice. It's been fascinating. It was fascinating to learn from them about the unique context of Cuba and what it's going through right now and how they're working for change. Lastly, just a random thought. This is something that actually just came up last week, and I thought, I want to share that with the CMU community. In my work with violence against women and girls around the world, the statistics are that 1/3 of girls and women worldwide experience violence of various types, both in the home and in public places. Most common is intimate partner violence by men against women. This is husbands and boyfriends against their partners. Physical, sexual, and psychological violence. But there are also other types of violence: sexual harassment in public places, violence against women in conflict and humanitarian situations, forced and early child marriage, trafficking, and FGM. The research and evidence about what works to end these forms of violence show that public awareness, effective legal systems, and accessibility to good quality services for survivors is not enough. Those things are needed, but they're not enough. The change needs to go deeper. The social norms that perpetuate and justify violence against women need to change. These are the values that discriminate against women and consider them of less value. So in Oxfam, right now we're working towards a global campaign linking civil society organizations around the world to change social norms that underline violence against women. But the thing I wanted to share with the CMU audience was, I came across an article that got me thinking. The researchers in this particular article, and I can share the reference if anybody's interested, pointed out that all types of violence are largely rooted in prevailing male gender norms. Not just about conflict, but more specifically about violence. That men use violence to solve problems because that's what it means to be a man. And that the use of violence in war or other types of armed conflict or in criminal gangs or drug cartels to get what you want is connected to the same values and norms that result in violence against women. Armed conflict continues to be a male-dominated enterprise, and it's not an arena where I think we need to work for gender parity. But I have often wondered about the training men receive to be soldiers and combatants and how this impacts them when they go back to their families and try to be loving, giving, respectful family members. In violence against women, it's not just about stopping and preventing violence, it's working to transform gender relations that underlie it. Just like shifting from stopping wars to conflict resolution and then to conflict transformation, you need to go deeper. And I think the two are connected. It's kind of interesting that the previous two speakers also talked about different ways of conflict transformation. Here's one other angle, I think, to it. So I think that the two are connected. In the Anabaptist peace tradition and in conflict studies, could we explore more the expressions of masculinity that are at the core of all these types of violence? Anyway, maybe you're already exploring these connections in your work here at CMU, in which case I'd love to hear more about it. If not, this is a suggestion to you as researchers and practitioners of peace building to expand your research and thinking in conflict transformation and peace building to include social and gender norms that cut transversely through all types of violence, whether in an armed conflict zone, an urban neighborhood, or inside the home and the family. So to close, thank you so much for this delightful honor. MBBC was an ideal launch into adult life, and I will always be grateful for it. I'm pleased and proud to watch the college and university as it continues to stir curiosity and critical thinking with a core of faith, and that God calls us to participate in bringing about shalom, peace with justice and well-being for all people and for the earth. And just to close, a quote from Eduardo Galeano, who's a Uruguayan writer. He uses the word utopia, but I think shalom fits in here just as well. Utopia is on the horizon. I move 2 steps closer, it moves 2 steps further away. I walk another 10 steps, and the horizon runs 10 steps further away. As much as I walk, I will never reach it. So what's the point of utopia or shalom? The point is this, to keep walking.